Evening, everyone. Welcome to Pause for the Truth, where we are here to tell you what's really going on. Tonight's discussion is going to be an interesting one, to say the least. One thing that I am proud of here at Pause for the Truth is we try to keep up with what's going on in the community, what's important to people, the feedback that we're receiving from folks about things that really matter. Of course, I can't do this show alone. Joining me is co-host Dr. Rogers Kane. How are you doing this evening, Dr. Kane?
I'm doing great, Ms. Turner, and you're absolutely correct in terms of what we try to do and bring forth to the interesting topics. And we have some very, very interesting and exciting guests this evening, very knowledgeable guests, which I'll let you continue the introduction.
Yes, thank you. You're absolutely right. I think it's my first time meeting Attorney Obina Annam.
Obina,
I,
you nailed it. Yes,
I
yes,
nailed
ma'am.
it. It's my pleasure meeting you tonight, and thank you so much for joining us. I've heard a lot about you and know the work that you are doing with the D.W. Perkins Bar Association, and so we're so
Thank you.
thankful to have you joining with us tonight. Also, I've
Pleasure
met
to be here.
this. Thank you. Also, I've met this gentleman before, and it's been a long time. But Dr. Herman Miller, how are you doing tonight, Dr. Miller?
Thank you, Jocelyn, and thank you for having me.
Oh, we it's a pleasure, and this is a very interesting topic. Either you have one opinion or the other. Rarely is there an in between, but I think the in betweens is what helps us to move the pendulum, if you will, or at least respect one another's decisions or opinions, rather, about tonight's topic, and that is, of course, Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade is it means a lot to some people. Some people are very against it, and some people aren't. Well, I'm not going to make an assumption. By the way, I am going to ask one of our guests, or Dr. Kane, if you can enlighten our audience, because one thing that Dr. Kane and I have learned through this process is younger people are not aware of all the hype about stuff, right? And
Right.
so those of us who are old timers and have been around, when we say Roe v. Wade, we know what that is. But which one of you would like to tell our audience what is Roe v. Wade?
Miss Turner, let me say one quick thing. Two things. Actually, I would like for Mr. Annam to go ahead and comment on that, given that he's the younger in the crew, barring you, but he's the younger in the crew. And two, I do want him to preface who he represents. Who D.W. Perkins is, what
It
D.W. Perkins
is.
Bar
Yeah.
Association is all about.
Thank you, Dr.
Oh,
Kane.
thank you, doctor. I'm the president of the D.W. Perkins Bar Association. The way I like to explain that is we have the American Bar Association, which black attorneys were not allowed to join at some point in time. So we had to start something called the National Bar Association. And although attorneys are now allowed to join the American Bar Association, even though they are black, the National Bar Association and its traditions and chapters carried on. And the D.W. Perkins Bar Association is one of those chapters. Actually a sub affiliate of the Virgil Hawkins chapter, which covers the entire state of Florida. And then we would be considered the chapter for the Northeast Florida region. And it'd be a shame if the only lawyer here wouldn't be able to tell you all about Roe v. Wade. So I can proceed and tell you, give you the skinny on that if you want.
Yes.
Sure. So Roe v. Wade is what's called a landmark Supreme Court decision. You have the three branches of government. I hope that the kids at least know that we have the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branches of government in D.C. And these branches work as checks and balances on each other. And you always hear about Congress. That would be the legislative branch. The executive branch is headed up by the President of the United States, and the judicial branch is the Supreme Court, and that is comprised of the nine justices. And Roe v. Wade is considered a landmark decision because it actually is a decision. Well, it was decided before I was born, in 1973. And essentially, the justices decided that no state could pass a law restricting abortion, and so it essentially invalidated a lot of laws that were on the books at that time that prevented women from getting abortions. And it's a decision that now, with this new, well, it's a leak of a decision that has not been handed down yet, but it's expected that the Supreme Court is going to overrule that landmark decision. And another way to explain it is you have perhaps some a decision that some of the young people may have heard of, Brown v. Board of Education, and that's a similar in that it's landmark. It's a landmark decision from, I believe, 1954 or thereabouts, and that desegregated the schools, and so it became illegal for schools to segregate children by race, and some other stuff that came with that. But that's another example of a landmark decision, and being that this would restrict, it would invalidate a lot of laws. It would be a restriction on, I would say, women's rights. You can also say that this decision that's being handed down will also be considered a landmark decision.
Very good.
I'm so happy that you also mentioned Brown v. Board of Education, because it is important, I think. And when we talk about this has nothing to do with it, but it just brought to mind, when we talk about the COVID vaccine, a lot of people have had great pause with someone telling them that they need to get vaccinated. What people don't understand when it comes to laws and vaccines and other things that were enacted years and years ago, prior to them being born, they're just things that are in place that all of us benefit from, right? In one way or the other. And I think that people should be encouraged to do their homework. There's a great opportunity to look at what other laws that are enacted that we all have to adhere to on a daily basis, from using our seatbelts to wearing clothes in public and all sorts of things. So while we may have varying opinions about things, laws were made for our benefit. Dr. Miller,
Yes, ma'am.
why do you think people have so much strong opinions about the choice of giving women a choice to have an abortion or not?
Let me rephrase your question, or at least understand. You're asking me, why do women, or at least people that want people to have a choice, why they're so adamant about it? Is that what you're asking me?
I'm glad you said that, because you know how you say something and you realize, boy, that sure didn't come out right. So, and I guess I have to, let me back up a second and say, why is this issue so volatile now? Why are people so mixed about, the whole idea of taking away one's right to have an abortion, or having a choice of having an abortion, maybe?
Let me just say this. Unfortunately, the quote pro-life, as you want to say, and I say who want you to have a choice, they are considered the silent majority. And what we have been seeing over the years, and even currently now through the Supreme Court, is what you would call the vocal minority. So it hasn't been that people haven't been adamant about choice, and they became adamant because of this. It's just that everybody's been so complacent. And just to tell you, even in my own practice, because I do abortions, and I have been doing abortions since 1979, and been doing them in my private practice since 1982. And I'm appalled at young people, just like we alluded to earlier. I'm always asking them, what do they know about the laws that are constantly being put upon us that's changing the situation? And I'm really appalled at those that say, well, no, I don't know. And we're talking about young women of the voting age. Now, when I have someone in their mid 30s, a lot of these ladies have kept up with what's going on. But the younger, again, as I say, the silent majority, they really don't know what's going on until the situation comes up that they need the service. And then when they come to the clinics or the facility that allows them to get the service, then they're told these things and they all bewildered, like, I didn't know all these things were going on that's going to affect me. And my thing to them now is that you have the power to get out and vote and change these things. And the only way you're going to do that is to stay aware of what's going on. Don't become complacent. And that's what's happening, Jocelyn, over the years, that the quote pro-choice folks have become the silent majority.
Mhm.
And it's sort of like what's happening now with the political parties. If you want to say, you got one party that's so vocal about everything, and another one that's not saying anything.
Well, I'm glad you said that because as you recognize, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And when we are ignorant of, or when we have a certain level, a certain degree of ignorance, we don't know what's going on. And so we don't act upon it. And as you say, we wait until it act upon us. And it's important for people to stay woke, as they put it, to stay woke as to your political surroundings and things and laws that affect you. The um, what is Mr. Adam? What is the premise by which you think the Supreme Court, or what you saw in terms of those leaks? What is the premise by which they are trying to justify overturning Roe versus Wade?
Well, I'll say this: the leak itself is unprecedented. It's something that's never happened before. We don't. Our read among the legal community is that it's likely that the draft that we've seen is a real draft, and that essentially what we think is going to happen is going to happen. So Justice Alito, in his opinion, he essentially says that Roe v. Wade is invalid because it doesn't um, argue for any particular constitutional right. And we're dealing with justices that were appointed from the Federalist Society. And the Federalist Society is an American organization of conservatives, and they have been working for decades. I mean, ever since the Roe v. Wade decision has been handed down, they knew what it was going to take to get it overturned, and it just so happened that it took almost 50 years. But what Justice Alito at least tried to justify it in his opinion by saying that Roe v. Wade it was never right because it didn't make reference to any constitutional right, and this goes back to what I'm saying about the Federalist Society. They particularly believe in what you call a textual reading of the Constitution, meaning that they're very much about the Constitution at the time it was written and what it meant at that time, and so he harkens back in his opinion, which I think is flawed in this way, back to the ancient times when the Constitution was written, when things were very different. And then he also says, and I think this is just gaslighting, but that this decision should be left to the people, meaning that the states should be able to make their own laws, or Congress should pass a constitutional amendment, which is unlikely. But I think that's just gaslighting to get what he really wanted, which was just simply to overturn Roe v. Wade, and it's a step, I think, in the wrong direction. If we go back to that Brown versus Board of Education case, that was obviously a step in the right direction, but it was also a decision that overturned another decision, Plessy v. Ferguson from 1896. So you're talking about almost similar now, over 50 years of precedent being overturned by another decision. But what happened in that time? I mean, the civil rights movement was going. People started to realize, that Black people are human beings too and are equal to anyone else. And so the kind of precedent that was established with Plessy versus Ferguson back in 1896 became more and more unpopular as the decades went on. Here you have Roe versus Wade decided in 1973. At that time, 2 out of 3 Americans consistently polled would say that they agreed that abortion should be legal in some circumstances, in most circumstances, to be clear. And now, fast forward 50 years later, and the public sentiment has not changed.
Right.
It's only conservatives' opinions and decision making. The justices of the Supreme Court, their opinion has changed.
That silent minority is what you're referencing, right?
Dr. Miller put it excellently. This is the vocal minority that has now influenced the Supreme Court by, mind you, a Senate that confirmed these 3 justices that President Trump picked. They were confirmed by a Senate that does not represent the majority of this country. Right. And that's 3 justices, all picked 1, 2, 3 in a row, that are now signing on to this opinion against.
Which is what Trump promised when he got elected. But
yeah, one thing that that's interesting is that, and when I talked to some folks about the topic that we had tonight, someone said something very interesting to me, is that some politicians have elected officials, I'll call them that, when it came down to the choice of wearing masks to protect others from COVID-19, and specifically for children to be able to wear masks in school should be a parent's right, right? So it's all about rights that people have. That's been the main push that we have. I have a right to decide if I want to wear a mask. I have a right to decide if I want to get vaccinated. So why is it then that people don't think that women have a right to decide what she wants to do with her body, that is what's best for her and her family at that particular moment? Why do you think people don't understand or make that connection between what our rights are?
Let me piggyback on that as well with the same question. So when it came down to what Ms. Turner is saying, it came down to the mask, it's the individual's right. But then when it came down to the abortion, it's states' rights. Okay, and they talk about the whole 10th Amendment deal. But why is it, Dr. Miller, you think all of a sudden, and I know this may be a very political answer, but why you think all of a sudden it's no longer the individual right, it has now become the state rights?
Well, and I may get some folks upset with me, but I really don't care. But unfortunately, religion has become such a big thing in politics now, and you are driving all of this is being, as far as I'm concerned, being driven by these conservative, ultra religious groups in the Republican Party, and they have these old Victorian attitudes that the man is dominant, the man's supposed to control everything, women are subservient, and that women can't make decisions about themselves, and that women aren't intelligent. All these are things that these people believe that needs to still be in existence. They're talking about reversing, finding if they pass Roe versus Wade. They're talking about going after birth control pills and IUDs, and let's not even to consider what they're going to do to the gay rights movement. But again, this is, if you look at everything now, you've got a lot of religious groups pushing this and giving their opinions. They hold, and Trump showed that they hold a significant number of votes. And so these people are doing whatever they can, these politicians, that is, to get the votes to get in office. And once they get in office, they're subservient to these groups that put them there, not to the people that that think that they should be doing what's good for everyone.
Dr. Miller, I'm sorry, I thought you were finished.
And I will say this: I don't know if you are aware, here in the state of Florida, recently the 24-hour wait law went into effect, which requires a patient to come to my clinic 24 hours prior to her being seen, actually to get her abortion. In other words, she has to come to me today. By state law now, I'm required, which we do anyway, to tell her the risk of carrying her pregnancy to term versus the risk of her having an abortion. and then letting her go home and then coming back tomorrow to actually initiate the process. My point on that is no woman in all these years that I've delivered thousands of babies in this city, done thousands of abortions, and I have yet to meet a woman that woke up this morning, found out she was pregnant, and called a clinic to make an appointment the next day for an abortion. All these ladies have gone through weeks, if not months, of a decision-making process. And for the state or the state to throw another day of anxiety on them. And on top of that, our minority women are losing an extra day off from work. They're having to spend an extra day off from work to come to a clinic 24 hours prior to something that doesn't require them to do that. But this is, and when I ask, as I said before previously, about young folks, I've asked a lot of these young girls that I'm seeing, and I hate to use the term young girls, but these young women, and we're talking about women between the ages of 19 and 27 who are totally unaware of these things that are going on. And their attitude is that if I need the procedure and I've had it done, well, that's it. I don't need to get involved in anything else. And that's what I preach constantly. You may not know if you ever need this procedure again. You may not know if a relative or a friend may need it again. And the other thing too, and I'll stop talking for a minute. The other thing too is that when women get into a situation like this, meaning an undesired pregnancy, or I shouldn't say undesired or unwanted, but situations arise that they can't carry it for whatever reason, whether psychological, financial, or medical. They really find out who their friends are when they say, I've got to have a termination. They really find out who their friends are. And a lot of times they find out that this person is really not my friend because they won't support my decision. And a lot of that decision making support is based on religious beliefs.
Mr. Adams, wanted to comment?
No, Dr. Miller is touching on what I would call, it's one of many roadblocks that are put up in mostly conservative states that prevent in some form or fashion a woman's right or access to abortion. And up until now, assuming that this decision comes down as expected, that was the best play that these state governments had at restricting abortion because of the Roe versus Wade decision. Because Roe v. Wade was considered such solid jurisprudence, it was only these types of laws that were going to be able to hinder. The conservatives figured if we can't ban it outright, we're just going to hinder it as much as we can. Not unlike, say, voting rights, which are hindered in the same way. And currently, laws are being passed specifically for that purpose, just to be a roadblock to a particular type of vote.
What other laws that are being discussed that might not be as vocal or as verbally talked about as far as women's rights being threatened? Because if we go back years ago, when it comes to women's rights, it's not just about having an abortion or not. There are other things that women have had to fight for over the years, and laws were passed in order to protect our rights. Is there anything else on the horizon that as ladies we need to pay attention to?
I don't want to be too extreme, but up until now, I never would have thought that Roe v. Wade would be overturned. But I also think that with this decision, it's you're opening the door to a lot of common sense jurisprudence being under fire. A good example would be, I don't know, miscegenation laws, which are laws in some conservative states that prevented interracial coupling, essentially. You also have laws that that could be laws that for contraception, for example, that could be in danger. And also just private sexual acts, anything that a woman would consider private and not even discussed. These are things that can be brought out to the open with these types of laws that are meant to control their autonomy or take away their autonomy, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Dr.
Let me,
Miller, what,
Joshua, let me interrupt for a second because he was saying, he mentioned earlier about how the Constitution and when it was formed, how it has evolved over the years and how things have changed. And I can tell you in terms of women's rights too, I was appalled when I started my training, when I graduated from medical school and started my residency in 1978. I was appalled that women still had to have, if they were married, had to have their husband sign the consent form if they wanted a tubal ligation. And I said, what does he have to do with this? She's the one that gets pregnant, carries the baby, has all the complications associated with pregnancy. But again, another archaic law that we had on the books up until about 20 years ago.
wow, is that right? I think, Dr. Miller, what I'd like for you to talk about when we talk about history, what are the dangers? What happened years ago before abortions became legal? You know, talk about that. What happened to ladies who, went
It,
in those back rooms and
it's ironic that you asked me that because let me put it this way. I started my residency training in 1978. Roe versus Wade was passed in 1973. I did my training here at it was University Hospital, which is Shands, Jacksonville now, which you know is a very busy county hospital. I was told, and abortions at that time were legal. I was trained to do abortions in my residency program, and I was told that prior to 1973, you had an average of about 5 to 8 women per year in Jacksonville, Florida alone that had to be hospitalized for an illegal botched quote pregnancy termination. I can tell you that the 4 years that I spent at that hospital during my training, I never saw one woman, and I don't think if you went back to every hospital in the city now, you have not had anybody report from any emergency room in this city that a woman came in with a botched abortion and had to be treated. I didn't see a single one in the 4 years I was there, and in the 40 years that I've been in practice, I still yet to have seen a woman that I've had to go to the hospital to take care of because someone did a botched abortion.
And I happen to also train a few years later than Dr. Miller, but train at the same institution. And I never saw it either. But what I will question is what this bodes to discuss is that historically it was the people that were going to suffer the most or will suffer the most are Black women in terms of their desire to have an abortion. And Dr. Miller, the reason I mention that is because, in that institution, there's a whole lot of Black women that being an academic institution locally, there was a lot of Black folks that were there. And for a good while, that was on the OBGYN services that we had for many of our Black women. But can anybody speak to the fact that there are people that making it a Black woman's issue about access to abortion because if they are the ones that get them, and I'm just repeating what some people have said, the majority of the abortions.
That's not true.
I didn't think so, but
It's not true. And I can tell, I can't give you exact numbers, but just based on the number of years that I've been doing this, especially at the clinics that I've gone to, and even the clinic where I have been for the last 20 years, I can tell you now that the number of Black women do now outnumber the number of white women that come to that clinic for procedures. You will find that there are a lot more Black women, I think, that are talked into keeping their pregnancies by their quote grandmothers or whatever because they don't know anything about abortion, and by their religious beliefs, they think that is wrong, that she shouldn't have that done. And again, those numbers are skewed. I don't know who's making those numbers up, but that is not true. And I'll tell you something else that'll startle you as well. You talk about the Catholic Church leading the fight against abortion, against contraception, and against the gay movement. But yet, it's okay for the priest to have relationships with the choir boys.
Yeah.
So tell me how is that okay, but it's not okay for a woman to have a choice?
I mean, what kind of morality is that? I mean, you're looking at some of our representatives, our political figures, and the things that they are doing is the craziest thing, including our past president, most recent past president. In that, I mean, who could? I never fathomed anybody would condone that type of behavior out in the open. I mean, I knew it was happening, but I didn't think they would condone that out in the open. So, Mr. Adam, one of
Dr.
the
Kane,
things.
Dr. Kane, let me pause for a second. For those of you who are just joining us now, we're talking about what are their consequences of reversing Roe versus Wade? Some of you may have an opinion, and I know as you're watching or listening, as you're thinking, if you have a question for Attorney Annam or Dr. Miller, please, you can post your comment or you can give us a call. Yes, we have a new feature, 904-469-8488. Again, it's 904-469-8488. If you have any questions of our panelists, now is your opportunity to ask, because as I stated in the very beginning, we know that people have varying opinions about this topic. But what we try to do is educate people, let you hear the historical perspective of why Roe v. Wade, as well as some other laws that Attorney Adam talked about tonight, why they're so important for us. And one thing that Dr. Kane always likes to mention is make sure that you vote. Make sure that you vote, that you're registered to vote, first of all. Make sure that you study, as Attorney Adam has talked about, and even Dr. Miller, that you understand the laws that are in place that affect you and your family. And the decisions that you make now, unfortunately, can come back to haunt your children or your grandchildren. Go ahead, Dr. Kane, with your question.
Well, I was just going to relate, ask. Someone mentioned earlier about, I think it was Dr. Miller. You mentioned earlier about the effects that missing another day off from work would have on young ladies. In fact, Janet Yellen, if you guys remember who she is the Federal Reserve. Is that what she is? Janet Yellen? I forgot. Anyway, I think she's the Federal Reserve chairman, and she spoke to the impact that Roe versus Wade may have on the U.S. economy as it relates to women, and I'm conjecturing here, as it relates to women missing work from pregnancies and so on and so on and so on. And I know that is not a reason to necessarily have an abortion, but I will say that the financial impact on women as it relates to being able to carry the full term as they see it may be humongous. And when you have people who says they don't want abortion at all, but then in the same breath don't want to help support those women and children when they arrive on this earth, in terms of them being able to just to survive, I see such a conflict of interest. And I know that was a statement and an opinion of mine, but anybody wants to comment on it or any other question would be fine.
Well, Rogers, we see it all the time in terms of uh, what uh, we're talking about. If we lose access, even in the state of Florida, if Roe v. versus Wade passes, your governor has decided that he's going to try to pass an outright ban on abortions totally. If you look at the map that they've been showing recently on CNN and other news channels, you will find that we're talking about economic impact now. You will find that if a woman needs to have a pregnancy termination, she may end up spending as much as $3,000 or $4,000 to travel to another state. So that's significant financially. In terms of right now, with the law that's going on in Texas, I'm seeing a significant number of women from Texas that's coming to Florida, coming to my clinic in Jacksonville. And the unfortunate thing about it is a lot of them are afraid to tell people that they're coming to Florida because of the law in Texas that allows someone to quote prosecute them or sue them or turn something in to the state that they had terminated their pregnancy. So it's just incredible in terms of what's going on and how, as I've said previously, our younger population doesn't realize how this is affecting them, and that they need to become aware and get involved.
We do have someone on the line, but I want to ask Mr. Adam, and you may be itching to answer this anyway. Texas is one of those states where they're trying to make it a crime that if women go somewhere else and have an abortion, and they want to come back, they want to prosecute those women. I mean, is there a privacy issue involved? Is there how can you prosecute someone for what you say a crime in Texas, but it was committed in another state? I don't know.
So the law that Dr. Miller is referring to is a very odd Texas law, which allows, it almost works as a bounty. It allows anyone to sue, anyone that
Vigilante situation, basically.
Yeah, it's vigilantism. Anyone that assists with an abortion, you can sue them. I think the number now is $10,000. You can just file a suit in your local, Harris County, whatever, Dallas courthouse. And if that person, let's say, is a Texas resident that went on to Florida to get an abortion, then you can sue that person and collect your $10,000 or get a judgment for $10,000 against that person. You can also probably get one against Dr. Miller. It probably wouldn't be enforceable on the books the way the laws are on the books today, but give our governor enough room, and perhaps we could see laws like that here. You'll see some state to state cooperation between a Florida and a Texas, say, where you can now go after Dr. Miller all the way from Texas for performing the abortion on the Texas resident, maybe the husband, let's say, of a wife that wanted to exercise her autonomy by going to Florida and having an abortion.
Well, that's even beyond that. It sounds like what you're saying is that you throw something against the wall, throw the spaghetti against the wall, see what sticks. If I'm a person who's just trying to collect 10,000, it may not be that it's truthful. It may be truthful, but if I report it, an individual as having had an abortion in Florida, now that the individual has to defend themselves against those allegations. And what are the repercussions if they were wrong and there was no abortion?
Well, see, now this is a law that hasn't really, it's new, let's say that first, and it hasn't been enforced because, this decision hasn't been handed down yet. So this is the type of law, it's very novel, and we don't know what's happening with it yet because it hasn't, none of these cases have gone the distance in Texas. So these are all questions that really, remain to be answered.
They had one episode apparently about 2 or 3 weeks ago in which a woman from Texas aborted a pregnancy, and basically what happened was they tried to prosecute her, but the district attorney said that he wasn't going to pursue that, and he dropped it.
Yeah. Okay. The person on the line, Tyrone, JT, what do you go ahead and speak to that?
Our behind the scenes guy has appeared, which he rarely makes his appearances, comes from behind the camera, but as we said earlier, we are introducing a new feature that if you have a question, you can dial in. Tyrone, is there a caller on the line for us?
Yes. Hello, everyone. And we do have a caller on the line. Caller, go ahead.
Caller? It's Ben. We're not hearing. Tyrone, are you hearing?
Ben, hold on 1 second. They said they're not hearing you.
With technology, even though we have the technology expert, there are some glitches. So I'm going to go ahead and ask a question of, are you ready, Tyrone? Or you want me to go ahead?
Tyrone, you mute. So
yeah, he may be working on it. So, Attorney Adam, this is very hard for me to wrap my head around because, I think about the folks who, as Dr. Miller said, if a woman makes the decision to have an abortion, it's not just, I'm pregnant today and I'm going to go and get an abortion tomorrow. But is there anything on the book for the men who impregnated her that the woman can then countersue him?
No, I don't. You mean for getting her pregnant?
Yeah, if she chooses, for instance, I recall during my experience at the health department, I had some clients who said that their husband did not allow them to use birth control, and Dr. Miller alluded to that tonight. Did not allow them to use birth control. So let's just say that's the case. If a woman husband does not allow her to use birth control and she gets pregnant, can she sue him?
Well, let me expand on that even more, Ms. Turner. What about some of the legislation I've been hearing, to where they ask, and you got to. Dr. Miller alluded to it earlier about family planning, but in terms of having an abortion, some of the legislation are talking about the men have to give consent for these women to have these abortions. I mean, this is a very tricky subject, but if they can, that means they would have a vote as to what this woman can do with her body over the next 9 months, 10 months, or whatever it may be, and 10 months, 9 months, or shorter. Um, the My question is, why is it then the repercussions for the woman is one in where she has to raise this child and or I guess give them up for adoption. But what responsibility at that point and what obligations at that point does the man have if 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 these laws may be passed to where he can vote to have or not have that abortion as far as that woman is concerned?
Well, there are no laws on the books quite yet in that regard, and that's what is in danger of happening if
True.
this decision is overturned and then whatever else comes along with that. I think it's a slippery slope, and
Yes.
really anything that you can imagine that takes away a woman's autonomy or anyone's autonomy is possible if the Supreme Court is allowed to overturn jurisprudence like this in 5-4, 6-3 decisions.
Let me say this also. The discrepancy is just terrible in terms of insurance companies. Okay,
Oh,
they will not pay for one of my patients to get birth control pills, but yet they'll pay for her husband's prescription for Viagra.
right.
And as far as I'm concerned, Viagra is just a recreational drug because the people that use it don't really need it. And let them try and pass a law that says that a man would have to wait 24 hours before he can pick up a prescription for Viagra and see if that would pass.
Well, let me put it this way: they don't need it for survival, for sure.
Yeah, that's the truth.
They may need it for their pleasure as they see it, but they don't need it for survival. Being a family practitioner.
Jocelyn, you're muted.
Ladies, thank you. If you're listening, I mean, these laws and the things that Dr. Miller and Attorney Anna are saying are very, very, may sound antiquated to you, but we have to think about it from the physical standpoint, the emotional standpoint, and you're right, the financial standpoint. If a woman has to travel from one state to the other, and we talk about people who may be able to afford to do that. There are people who are low income and they can't afford to travel cross state, nor could they afford a lawyer if they're sued in order to avoid that. Oh, we have a comment. I think because of the World Wide Web and technology, more women will access illegal abortions. Do you agree, Dr. Miller?
I totally agree with that. I also think that what's going to happen is we're going to have a lot. Unfortunately, social media has allowed a lot of people to take advantage of situations, good and bad, mostly bad. And I think that what's going to happen also is that you're going to have people who are going to be on the social media illegally selling, quote, the abortion pill or Mifeprex, and it's not going to be the real thing, and it's going to another scam, and that's what's going to happen. It's going to promote something like that too, and you're going to see that. You're going to see a lot of people thinking they're getting the abortion pill, getting nothing, but somebody on the other end is getting rich off of it by scamming people.
And not only getting rich, they're getting their wishes. It may be the person that getting their wishes in terms of forcing them to move further along the pregnancy date, due date, that it becomes not able to have an abortion based on whatever the state law is in terms of the termination date limitation. If they can postpone it by falsely providing, an abortion pill, and the person finds out on week 14 that the abortion pill didn't work in a state where you have to have it by week 12, I mean, I can see that happening as well.
So, if Roe v. Wade is overturned, this is a question: would President Biden be able to veto the decision?
No, absolutely not. President Biden can veto laws that are passed by Congress, so that's a check that he has on that branch of government, but he has no such check on the judicial branch of government, which is the branch that is handing down this decision.
No veto.
Which is how we started this discussion, making sure people understand the three branches of government and how it works. And that's the thing that I think that keeps resonating over and over again, is people don't understand the way laws are set up in this country. So let me ask, does D.W. Perkins host not necessarily a discussion about Roe v. Wade, but does your association ever host any type of community discussions to help people understand, not to tell people, sway their decision about one thing or the other, but at least understand about the laws that could impact them and their families, as in, maybe before a big election is happening where we all get a chance to vote on different laws? Not to put you on the spot, but just asking.
I'd say that anything that we do to engage in the community, there's an element to it of us educating the community in legal aspects of whatever. This is something that's just happening, and it's unprecedented, unexpected. We were just figuring out what to do about all these voting rights restrictions that have been put in place in rapid fire succession over the past few months, and now this happens. The answer is yes, but we need to be doing more, and we're going to endeavor to do a lot more because the public, the knowledge of the public is not where it needs to be with regard to this issue. It's just not. Otherwise, it wouldn't have happened. I think one of the doctors said earlier that it was, I think the inaction or the majority not speaking up enough to this issue over the last 50 years. A lot of that has to do with, again, the unprecedented nature of this. We never could have seen this coming. But it's better to be proactive than reactive. And really, we're all in a position now where we're being reactive to this and not proactive.
And that's one of the faults I see with Democrats, that we are always being reactive, and we have to become more proactive. And that does bring up, for which we will be reaching back out to you, Mr. Adam, for another show in terms of we're talking about these voting rights issues and voting rights concern, which still ties into what we're talking about this evening. Well, there was another question. Did you see that question, Ms. Turner?
Yeah, talked about the psychological impact has the psychological impact the families experience for having unwanted children been discussed? I mean, we talk about the folks who are making decisions, and everybody who gets pregnant doesn't choose to terminate the pregnancy. Babies are born every day. Dr. Miller talked about, he's helped bring thousands of babies into this world. And so people have to think that babies are still being born. Pardon, I had to make sure I cleared that up. Dr. Miller, what are your thoughts about that? Do you see as many people experiencing psychological issues about choosing to have a baby versus not choosing to have a baby?
I don't see that as much as I see people using having a baby to quote repair a relationship, which is totally.
Mhm.
And I've seen even in my own practice, I've had women that have gotten pregnant. They've been in quote abusive relationships or a relationship where maybe no physical abuse but psychological abuse, and they're thinking that if I have this baby, even though I don't really want to have it, that's going to patch up my relationship, and that happens quite frequently. And at the same time, we also know that it really doesn't patch the relationship up. It just makes it worse because now you have another burden on you, both financially as well as psychologically, to take care of. But again, we do have measures out here in terms of counseling programs,
Mhm.
people that need that type of information. Now, whether it's utilized on a large basis or not, I can't tell you because even at my clinic, we have referrals for patients for adoption, for counseling following the procedure, et cetera. And again, whether or not all these services are utilized in terms of the numbers, I really couldn't tell you. Let me just say one thing real quick so that your audience will know as well. I recently looked at a study that was done by the National Center for Biotechnology Information. And basically, what they did, they compared legal induced abortion to childbirth. And their conclusion came to, and this was between 1998 and 2005, and this was data from the Center for Disease Control. And they showed that women, during that period of time, there were 8.8 deaths from live births. That is, women who carried their pregnancy to term. And out of that 100,000, every 100,000, we had 8.8 women that died. At the same period of time, for 100,000 abortions, we had zero point 0.6 women that succumb. So again, the risk of death associated with childbirth is 14 times higher than that with having an abortion. And so when people tell you that abortions are not safe, that's why I wanted to present this information so that you can let them know it's much safer than having a child. But that's not to say that I encourage women to get pregnant to go out and have an abortion because it's safer. But
Right.
but you have these protesters and these people will throw information. We also have another falsity out there. The protesters at my clinic have a sign that says, "Call if you took the pill, contact us. We can reverse the pill." That's a lie. There's nothing out there that can reverse the abortion pill once it's taken.
Exactly.
Wow. It's rare that I am left speechless, if any of you know, but tonight has been a very interesting discussion. As I
Let's get
mentioned a few minutes ago, we have the opportunity for folks to call in. And for what I understand, there are several folks waiting to call in. Please forgive us. We are having some technical
well,
difficulties.
Tyrone wants to try it again. He wants
I'm,
to try one
I'm
more time.
about to say that.
Oh, okay.
Hold on. But Tyrone has come from behind the camera again to allow someone to call in and ask a question. Take it away, Tyrone.
You muted, Tyrone. You muted.
We do appreciate your patience as we work through the technical issues with regards to this new avenue that we're going down. I do have one caller on the line now, and we're going to give him an opportunity to ask a question. Caller, go ahead.
Okay. I want to thank you all, the panel, for this great discussion and covering the topics. But I want to go back to something I think that Dr. Miller had spoke about earlier. But it's when we think in terms of Christians and the Republicans and the birth control, wanting to reverse it. I'm asking you all, do you all think that population control have a lot to do with it from a standpoint of by the year of 2050, the white population will be the minority? And so now, by doing it this way, there's already a stop loss, or when it comes to black folks, we already know the rate at which we are dying. And so now with the white population, they need to be able to to increase those numbers, because there was a statistic that showed that it has to be at least 3 children in the household, and and 2 parents. But if you look at the white American family size, they are at about 2 kids and maybe a husband and wife, and so they're not able to sustain at that rate. So when the Republicans are pushing this, or the Christian base are pushing this, is this the reason? One of the reasons that they're doing this.
Thank you for your question. Who'd like to take that one?
I'll jump in on that because I went fishing yesterday, and on my boat I was talking to the guys with me, and that's one of the things that I brought up. The fact that the white population is decreasing, and we got studies that show that when they took the survey, this happened last year, they published it, and back in I think 1890 was the last time they took a survey, and the white population has decreased by 7%, and they are startled and upset by that. And we also know that the most popularly rising population now are interracial, and so again, to address that question, it kind of answers itself. White population decreasing, interracial population increasing. Good old Christian boys, no, we can't have that. And
I'll play devil's advocate here, Dr. Miller, and I'll say that I'll remind everyone that this is the conservative movement to overturn this decision began the day after it was handed down back in 1973. I don't think the program has changed. I don't think there's been an increase on from what you call it, the vocal majority or minority on this issue. I think that to say that something has happened, or some type of trend is influencing the overturning of Roe v. Wade, that doesn't sit well with the fact that, like I said, this is something that it's a decades-long movement by conservatives to overturn this decision. So there's always been a certain set of ultra-conservatives that wanted this to happen. It's always been that way from the day that Roe v. Wade was handed down.
That I agree with you is true, but you did have MAGA around then.
Right.
Now that you have MAGA around, they have become much more influential because they're the ones that feel threatened by this as well.
Well, you didn't have MAGA. You may not have had MAGA around, but you had MAGA ideology around. And these people are going bat crazy that they are looking at becoming in the minority instead of the quote majority. And that is driving that white male, I'm going to say Judeo-Christian, but I might be using the wrong religious terminology, society in which the dominance is white male oriented society to preserve their presence as being the
call from.
I think we have another call.
Hello there. How you doing? Thanks for calling Pause for the
How long you want to mute your line until we're ready for us?
Hi.
Hello. How you doing? Did you have a question?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Did you have a question or comment that you'd like to make on the show?
I do. This is Sam Thompson. Hi, Dr. King.
Hey, Sam.
Dr.
Hi.
All right.
Hey, Dr. Miller.
So here's what we're gonna do. We got one person in front of you. If you could just hold on for me, and then we'll get your question in.
Sure.
Okay.
Tyrone. As Ms. Turner pointed out, we are experimenting for the first time with this. So, Tyrone, did you have it ready, or do we need to move on to Ms. Thompson's question?
He might be listening to something
different,
but
I have a question of Mr. of Attorney Adam. Just a real quick question for you. What should I'll say ladies, but what conversations do you encourage people to have? And this could be of you and Dr. Miller too, to understand as these things happen. What are some
Thompson,
things
I'm waiting
that,
for them
that
to
folks can
respond,
be
then we're going to
doing?
go ahead and get you in, okay?
I'm sorry. Tyrone, are you ready? Tyrone. Call in Tyrone. Tyrone is multitasking.
Tyrone is very busy.
Yeah, so what conversation should people have? I mean, we're having this conversation tonight about Roe v. Wade. Now, we talked about people becoming familiar with laws. The one thing that I like having, here in Jacksonville, for those of you who are in other places, we used to have what we call study circles, and those are the opportunities for that people who are on differing sides of the coin, if you will, would get together and have conversations. Do you think that that's a good idea for people to really understand why the difference and how can we work together to talk to our elected officials to say we've come together, this is what we'd like to see as far as our country, the direction of our country.
What you're suggesting is, I don't know, a happy medium. Maybe people can find a happy medium. Yeah. I don't think that applies to this situation. I think that the conservative, ultra-conservative silent minority
is point you're going to be able
hijacked.
To hear, and then once we ask for your response,
Tyrone, you need to mute your mic.
I think that the ultra-conservative minority has hijacked the Supreme Court, and they've made a decision that is against the will of the people. I'll remind you, as I said earlier, that 2/3 of this country believes that abortion should be legal in most circumstances. This decision goes against the will of the people. So the conversation that we're having with each other is, as some would say, preaching to the choir. Yes, this is not something that should happen, is what 2/3 of the country would say. So the conversation that needs to be had is not specifically to the or substantively to the question of abortion and its the morality of it. I don't think that's the conversation that needs to be had. I think we need to have more so a conversation about why the democracy is not reflected in DC. Why is it that the will of the people is not reflected in this Supreme Court?
And we all have our own biased opinion as to the case. Not saying that it's wrong, my biased opinion, but we are aware of what it all means. And I think I spoke to it before I became somewhat silent as to the whom and what and why they really want to suppress the growth of interracial, as Dr. Miller says, interracial couples, black folk, the non-Caucasian sect of the population.
The interesting thing that Dr. Miller said that I wanted to point out is that insurance companies won't pay for certain procedures for ladies, but they'll pay for certain things for men, in terms of the choice of paying for, whatever. And I don't remember what you said. They'll pay for Viagra, but they won't pay. What was it, Dr. Miller?
Contraceptives.
Yeah. Yeah, and to think that choice is being, that right there, when we talk about the divisiveness that is present in our country today. I think we do have a question from someone right now. Tyrone, are you ready to let him in?
Yes, we are ready. We have a Miss Sam Thompson that's on. She'd like to ask a question.
Go ahead, Miss Thompson.
Dr. Thompson.
Hey.
Hello. Your question.
Hey. I was actually. Oh, go ahead. There's an echo, so.
No, you go ahead. Ask your question.
Turn your show down.
Oh. Okay. So I was actually trained as a pharmacist by Dr. Miller. So I got to see firsthand how some of these procedures go. And I just want to echo, it is very safe. But I have a question for Dr. Miller and the other gentleman there tonight. What does this mean legally for a pharmacist? Could I go to jail possibly in the future if I dispense misoprostol or if I dispense an IUD like I do at the Department of Health?
Nothing's changed quite yet as far as laws go. We have a decision that's coming down, perhaps sometime in the summer, and I believe that the laws vary from state to state. And so the best answer to your question is to consult perhaps state law, whenever this happens. And that's kind of a CYA thing for me. But I guess I could broadly answer your question to say that the truth is that yes, assisting with abortions in any respect can become illegal if this decision is handed down. It's a decision that very clearly overturns Roe v. Wade. It's unprecedented. There have been a number of cases that have come in since Roe v. Wade that have attempted to chip away at that precedent. This completely overturns it. So again, just to your wildest imagination, you think of any laws, anything that could be criminal with regard to abortion, pharmacists or otherwise, the answer is yes, it very well could be that you can put yourself in legal jeopardy.
Are there other things attached to other laws that are attached to? Sometimes I know when we vote, there are different things that may not be the biggest thing, but are use of contraceptives attached to Roe v. Wade? Not necessarily termination of pregnancy, but in terms of different contraceptives, are they attached to that big law or no?
There's a lot of legal reasoning that can be used to reason the issues of contraceptives and anything else. That reasoning is definitely, yes, is tied to Roe v. Wade, even if it's not discussed outright. And so the overturning of this decision, yes, it can flow and affect laws that are specific to contraception as well.
Look at this. The biggest thing that they want to do right now is get a decision from the Supreme Court. It's going to overturn Roe versus Wade. Now, the other side of the coin, there are numerous little patchwork laws all over the country now that are being brought up. Once we get Roe versus Wade passed, we're going to now throw this in. And as Attorney Adam said, contraception is probably going to be one of them. IUDs, and then of course the LGBT rights, all that is going to come back. But the biggest
what these states do, to be clear, is they pass the laws. I mean, you have 22 states that have laws on the books right now that would ban out abortion outright. They're not being enforced because of the Supreme Court decision that's about to get overturned. And so
they just need the Supreme Court decision.
Yeah, they need the Supreme Court decision that's being handed down to now enforce those laws. So these states have any number of laws. And you also have, going back to Brown v. Board of Education, that was a decision that was handed down, but the states did not follow suit immediately. You had several states that were outright defiant of the law, and you have several states that just did not take the laws that went against the Brown versus Board of Education decision off of their books for years, some states even decades. So the states will act as they will, and it's up to the Supreme Court to set that precedent, that jurisprudence that everyone has to abide by.
And I'm not an attorney. I can't even play one on television. But what I do see, I do recall, it was at the 10th Amendment, all of them trying to talk about the states' rights, and that is the preface by which they're trying to overturn Roe versus Wade, because
it's one of them, yes.
States' rights. And then if we allow each state to make the determination, then the jeopardy of your jeopardy as to what you do as it relates to abortion will be state dependent, if I'm not mistaken, right? And then the other thing is, someone mentioned earlier, it's a slippery slope. And as a lot of people, they previously thought that they didn't have a dog in this fight, but you have a dog in this fight. You may not realize where your dog stands, but there you have a dog in this fight, whether it's because of the similarity to Plessy Ferguson or whatever else. There's a dog in this fight as it regards to your personal and professional safety. People have to, particularly medical practitioners, have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, I think the thing, for the pharmacist to come on and say, could this potentially impact me as a pharmacist as I prescribe? I think the thing that I'd like for everyone who's listening to understand that this is a very big deal. We're having this conversation tonight because it's a very big deal. It's going to impact so many people, so many facets of our lives that people just have no idea. Be it if you're a pharmacist, a nurse, if you're the person who is driving the person across state to get an abortion, the potential legal issues that could face you for simply trying to help someone. I think the question that I have as we are several minutes over our show, and I don't know if this is for the attorney or the doctor, is, as Roe v. Wade currently stands, or as it is being considered to be overturned, will it include people who were raped or have children who are severe, or babies who are, severely disabled, if you will? And I know that's not the right terminology, but if they're seeing that the pregnancy is going to have some severe complications, for example, are those things still going to be allowed, or is it, when it says no terminations, is no termination?
Dr. Miller touched on this earlier when he mentioned the patchwork of laws across the country. That means that every state, they're going to have different laws that can go as far as to that extreme of saying that abortions are banned outright. And there are a lot of states that, again, have laws on the books that will do just that and will go as far as that. And there are some states that will not outright ban abortions, but will limit them substantially. And then there are other states that will, they already have abortion laws or the right to abortion codified in their laws. So
You actually, yeah, you
go
actually,
from one extreme to the other.
you've actually had some of these governors now, including the one in Idaho, that says that if they overturn Roe versus Wade, he is not going to allow abortions for any situation, even if the mother's life is in danger. And his comment was this: that he did not know of any diagnosis in pregnancy that says that the only way it can be cured is abortion. And so, as far as he's concerned, and he made comments too, which is ridiculous, that if a woman gets pregnant as a result of a rape, that it was an act of God for that individual and that she shouldn't terminate the pregnancy. So this is the kind of stuff that's being said all over by some of these Republican governors. And again, yes, whether you and I've even told right here in the state of Florida, when he talked about this ban after 15 weeks of pregnancy that's going to go into effect June 1st here in Florida. If you're over 15, if you're 15 weeks pregnant or more, you cannot get a termination in Florida after that. And the point is that I get a lot of referrals from physicians in this city that have quote abnormal pregnancies, meaning whether it's a genetic problem, whether it's a physical development problem. And again, that probably accounts for about maybe 2 to 3% of the procedures that I do. And these things sometimes are not diagnosed until they're 16 or 17 weeks.
Right.
So you're going to force these women to carry these pregnancies to term now, knowing that there may not be any viability once the fetus is born, or that it's going to be born with some type of defect that's going to put a significant physical and financial burden on you.
Well, I mean, anencephaly, whereby they don't have no brain,
no skull.
No skull. They have, and they're absolutely non-survivable on the outside. But you're gonna, and then this woman winds up having high blood pressure or toxemia of pregnancy that may take her out if she continues. But she's got to give birth to something that's non-survivable outside the womb, at risk of dying during childbirth or even before childbirth. It's absolutely no sense made of that from someone who may have a degree in tire changing at Sears and think that they're medical doctors, but somehow they got elected as governor.
And not only that, the numbers that I gave you that talking about the risk of carrying your pregnancy to term versus having an abortion, that number didn't include women who went into pregnancy that had prior medical problems.
Right.
So when we talked about an 8.8 death rate per 100,000 deliveries, we're talking about regular women with no medical problems.
Good health.
You're going into pregnancy already with diabetes, hypertension, asthma, other chronic diseases, epilepsy, whatever. Your risk goes up by almost tenfold.
Yeah, tenfold, 10 times what it normally would be. Okay.
Wow. Well, tonight has been a very interesting discussion. We've heard from the attorney as well as medical doctors what could potentially happen if Roe v. Wade is overturned. I think as we near the end of the conversation, and we certainly can invite you all to come back because the vote is not happening tomorrow nor next week. I would like to give our guests an opportunity as we near the end of our show to share your final thoughts about our discussion of are there consequences of reversing Roe v. Wade? I'll start with Dr. Miller.
There are significant consequences, and we alluded to all of them in our discussion this afternoon. But the biggest thing that women ought to be aware of is that nobody should be in an exam room between you and your doctor. That is, no politician should be in that exam room when I'm with my patient. And so the consequences of Roe versus Wade passing is showing that yes, we're going to be in that exam room every time you go in there to see that doctor or whatever.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. Attorney Adam, what are your final thoughts regarding the discussion of our topic? Are there consequences of reversing Roe versus Wade?
Yes, the consequences are tenfold. You're talking about something that's happening that's overturning almost 50 years of legal jurisprudence. With that comes the risk that other rights, other things that we took for granted are in jeopardy as well. And this is where the slippery slope metaphor comes in. If this can happen, then what else can happen? And if we're dealing with what we're seeing, I think, is our government being run essentially by an ultra conservative minority that is not reflected in the will of the people at large. And so people need to have really a more broader discussion about what's happening around them politically, because Roe versus Wade, as big as it is only a small piece of what can still happen, what may yet be to come.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Kane, what are your final thoughts regarding tonight's discussion?
Obviously, I'd like to thank our guests for participating in such an important discussion. I want to acknowledge that this discussion is not the end and beginning of what needs to be said. I also want to acknowledge that this is just the tip of the iceberg as it relates to the political outcomings of allowing the minority to control the population of the majority and what the majority of the population want. That we have to stay vigilant, stay focused, and again, I go back to when we want to make sure we have we want to check and see if we got what dog do we have in this fight. And while it may be about abortion, and I'm too old to worry about, an abortion, and too married, too old, and so on and so on. But the extension of that fight may also be, or is also, that's what Attorney Adam has said, and that is that it's a slippery slope. There are other issues that are at play that if we don't try to rescue this democracy and improve this democracy, I can't just say rescue it and let it be as is, but improve on this democracy, we're all in trouble. Black, white, blue, green, yellow. We're all in trouble if we don't stand up, if we don't take a stance, whether you like what a person is saying or not, if they're correct, just acknowledge it and let's go on ahead and do the right thing in our life. Thank again for our guest being here. Thank you, Tyrone, which I think, Ms. Turner, you're going to acknowledge our technological guru, and I appreciate everyone's attendance for this show. And we hope that we will have our technological experiment. It was a good one this evening, but we're going to get better as time goes on, and we want to make sure Mr. Adam realizes that this is not the end of his appearance here. It's just the beginning. Him and
Yes, indeed.
D.W. Perkins Bar Association.
Thank
Looking
you
forward to
again.
next time, y'all.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. Thank you, Attorney Adam, and of course, Dr. Kane. And to our listeners, we appreciate you tuning in, hearing varying opinions or thoughts and ideas about the reversal of Roe versus Wade. It is a topic that can just cause so much pain in our community. As always, we like to thank our behind the scene technology expert, Tyrone Jackson, who had to work through some challenges as we were introducing the ability to dial in. Join us next week for a different conversation. For those of us who have struggled with keeping our weight under control, unfortunately, so many of us, our families, our children, are experiencing obesity and overweight. And it's not just about how we look in terms of what social media says, but it's also the consequences of obesity. More and more children are being diagnosed with diabetes and high blood pressure, diseases that typically only affected adults. So join us next week for Pause for the Truth as we talk about what's really going on related to obesity. And thanks again for tuning in. And thank you to our guests. Have a good evening.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.